All right. Welcome. It is another exciting Pinto Town Hall. We are still in the early days of hosting these and still figuring out how to best fill the hour and create a space that ultimately allows for everyone to share what's on their mind, as the name Town Hall implies. And a lot of what's gone down is some monologues on my part to sort of kickstart the discussion with what's been on my mind. But I believe there are potentially a couple people in the town hall, and I can see our numbers are increasing as well, which is super encouraging. I believe there may be a couple people in the town hall today that have specific things that they were hoping to talk about, be it branding and spreading the word, be it basic questions about Pinto and how the mechanism works. So today, going to do something a little bit different. And instead of starting with a monologue, start with opening up the floor and seeing if there are topics that people want to engage in to start us off, whether that be questions, whether that be points people want to make or things they want to say. So opening up the floor, and not to call you out, Printo, but you're welcome to speak at any time.
Amazing. I'll take it. I'm happy to start off. But yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've been kind of following you guys since I guess mid-November, and I think kind of we had some dialogue about how kind of that main page looks and kind of the messaging around it. And I know that like I kind of had some thoughts around like when I first
Which
hit the
page?
landing page and kind of
The
the
landing.
the landing page. When I first hit the landing page, is kind of what information I was presented with and how it kind of represented itself to me. And I found it, I guess, just to start. Like, obviously, we all know like Pinto is nuanced, and that there are like a lot of kind of terms beyond just the classic like low volatility. And I think that it was there's like an initial learning curve. And so we kind of had some conversations around like how you can kind of better or just differently say or explain Pinto. And I kind of had I've fortunately done a little research on just like this space in terms of like how people are responding to, I would say, like more of the psychology and the research behind essentially like why they buy Bitcoin and or why they buy cryptocurrencies in general. And so I kind of wanted to just like open it up to everybody to just kind of have a discussion on like more so describing like what exactly the benefits of Pinto are to you. Like, and that's a question to everyone. And I guess like that's honestly a good place to even start. And hopefully it's not too broad.
Well, maybe I would just add a little bit of context, Printo. Thank you for jumping in. A couple days ago, I posted a message in the design channel thinking about a new landing page. And the reason I've been thinking about a new landing page is because of our conversations here, which is really downstream of the white paper and the way that we are introducing Pinto to the world as a scalable, Leviathan free, low volatility money protocol. And given that we as a group, as a community, like didn't really have a discussion about those terms, and the white paper was launched after the protocol or the website. I am interested in trying to do a landing page redesign to communicate what we're about a little bit more effectively. And Printo, I think you raised the question or maybe an observation that people are more interested psychologically in some sort of short-term benefit or short-term utility as opposed to something high in the sky like Leviathan free money. I don't know if you want to
Yeah.
extend that point
Yeah.
or give it again here.
Totally. I appreciate that. Yeah. So honestly, I think what it comes down to is it's more so about like when kind of redesigning something like this that's so in a way like while it's small, it's also like a very fundamental or foundational part of the experience, right? This is like the first thing people see. And I find that I guess it's really important to like know the audience of who you're trying to reach for. And like I think kind of in our discussions we talked about just like how it would be awesome to obviously reach for everyone, but starting to kind of drill down on like what would like the first ideal kind of group of people that you would want to attract to Pinto. And I think we've had some different ideas around what we all believe that is. And I thought that this could be a good forum to kind of talk about that a little more. So thank you, Ryan. But does that
Cool.
make
It makes sense to me, and I'm happy to give my opinion, and other people can voice their opinion as well because I'd be sort of curious to hear what people think. I feel like Pinto is in contrast to a lot of the industry that we're in because I see a lot of other protocols. I don't know if playing like trustlessness theater is the right way to describe it, but like they don't subscribe strongly to the idea of trustlessness. I think this is highlighted by some of the community members going to ETH Denver, going to the stablecoin event, and the majority of the conversation sort of centering around how to wrap treasury yields and distribute those yields on chain. And so I feel like, in my eyes, the thing that is different about us from the rest of the space, and I use space, to describe these other stablecoin protocols, is the value of trustlessness that we hold. And I think that if we can help people understand, how the protocol is designed and what risks there are to the trustlessness, I think that could be very interesting. I feel like that will speak loudly to the right people. Curious if other people believe that there are other values that we should lead with, but that's my opinion.
One of my favorite things about. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Please.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about Pinto is, it's like you get the prints. So in the traditional dollar, there's a group of people in the Federal Reserve sitting in front of their computer deciding how much money to print, and it's not at all based on market forces. It's rather based on government policy, basically, which is changing all the time. So the idea that we can create a set of rules and then ideally solidify those rules to cover every scenario or state of the system that we have, so that the interest rates on the debt and the how quickly the supply grows or decreases are controlled by these preset set of rules is pretty cool to me. And also the fact that if the supply does need to expand, then rather than the prints going to wherever the government decides them to go, they go into the people who are actually holding the currency, which I think is a really cool idea. So I think it would be great to list something, have some kind of motto or slogan that's like money where you get the prints, or like, I don't know, it's maybe something that captures that idea. I'm not great at coming up with phrases, but to me, that's like a cool part of the system.
And I think that touches on and exactly, like I feel like that touches on like some of the really unique aspects to it. And I guess it's always like trying to bridge that gap between more of the like non-technical people who are, and I use the example in kind of the design channel of like the like meme coin fanatics, for lack of a better term, but just like people who even like for the term print, like at what level do you dumb it down enough so that somebody can come in and not feel intimidated? And I feel like that's where it's like this discussion of like what the value is and like who is it valuable to in the beginning, to then kind of try to transition like whatever that value is into the right language to then address that group to start, if that makes sense.
I don't have a suggestion per se, but maybe just to chime in and share my perspective in particular, because something you just said, at least around like making it as accessible as possible, I'm not so sure is the right strategy, in the sense that I worry, and I don't even know if this wasn't what you're suggesting, feel free to correct me, but just in response, I feel like, at least in Beanstalk's case, I think what attracted myself and a lot of my friends was the white paper, and seeing how serious and honest and genuine and in some ways autistically detailed it was, and feel like it conveyed some message of seriousness. And I don't think anything about the Beanstalk white paper necessarily made it super simple or accessible. So it's a hard line to toe, because if you can, you definitely want to do both. It's like you don't want to scare away beginners, but I think there might be something lost if you go too far on that end of the spectrum with respect to like losing the more, I don't know, serious people, if you will. I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it. I don't know if I'm a serious person per se, but those are a few thoughts.
I mean, for me, the thinking on this end has always been that the starting point should be a little bit harder to interact with I think one of the things that made it such that the original Beanstalk community was so strong was that there was a little bit of a friction in terms of the language, and the UI was not designed such that any ape could just easily like dump into the thing. There was actually work that had to be done on the user to make it such that they could even get to the point where they could ape in, if that makes sense. So as much as I think it is important and appreciate very much the point that you're making, Printo, to make it more accessible to people, I question the extent to which making it more and more accessible sort of counterintuitively makes it such that the people that are adopting the thing at the beginning are not necessarily the best people to be adopting it from the protocol's perspective. I think it's worth saying that at this early stage of the game, you really are an early adopter of the thing. And there's only so much room for early adopters before the system will go through a growth cycle, if you will. And from that perspective, I think there's an argument to be made that there's value in making it such that the people that do adopt early are people that are more likely to end up being contributors or value add to Pinto because of their ability to go deeper into the thing. I think the counterpoint to that is, well, we're at 79 cents and it would be great for anyone to come play around with the system. So why make the barrier so high? But this is a dynamic that historically we've been very mindful of, trying to create a system that is both generally accessible, but at the same time not like a one-click, the lowest friction website possible, such that in my mind, it is helpful to try to filter for people that can really buy into the thing itself, if you will.
I don't think the goal is to create friction or have friction exist unnecessarily. It's more like you sort of hit a wall with respect to, explaining the system honestly, through the website, for example, and what's the minimum viable path to get someone to deposit or so. And as a result, there ends up just being some non-zero amount of friction.
I don't know if I agree with that. Go ahead, Printo. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to briefly say that I think you both make two really interesting points, which is just that right there alone is kind of like the ideal customer, or I should really say like user or person interested, is kind of somebody who, like, I would say, believes in that vision. And I think that there's like something really important to be said there, Austin, with being like somebody who has to kind of overcome the friction to kind of this like hard, honest nature of Pinto, which I think is something that is, I think, super important that kind of everybody recognizes, which is just like, that is the kind of person you want. Like, you want somebody who recognizes that the system is very honest and open. And I think that alone is something that's really interesting to hit on. And I guess just to follow that up with Ben, with your point, I think just in reference to Beanstalk, I would say the only thing I'd be curious about, which I just don't know the answer to, but just thinking about off the top of my head, is how would you say the market is different now than versus 2 years ago, or however many years ago? And like, does that kind of change the person you should be going after, I guess, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, crazy. It's been 3.5 years somehow. I think you're asking the right question. Like, does it really make sense to run the same meta given a different market structure and different potential audience? Actually, as you and Austin were speaking, this was exactly the thought that was going through my head. Like, actually, the people that are even coming to look at this may be have different personalities and different characteristics, such that it may just be that right now, from where I sit, you sort of have like, and this is totally naive, but in my head, you have like the jaded, like long-term, more experienced people that have been here for a while and have not left, but are sort of sitting around wondering like, when is this stuff all going to happen? And to me, the way to engage and interface with those people is to be super rigorous. And there's a fine line between rigor and using terms that people have no idea what they mean, such that, they just get turned off. But in my mind, it's like the rigor on this current landing page, I think, has the potential to catch a jaded person. It is a lot at once, if you know what I mean. a lot of information. So I think from that perspective, it might be too much too soon. But I think when it comes to the more experienced crypto people, we want to represent that we are deep and that we are something different that hasn't existed before, and that, you know, we're worth your time to come play around in. And then separately, I think you have maybe like more of a newer tranche. Although from what I can tell, it doesn't feel like this time around there is such a like a newbie audience, or to the extent that there are newbies, there aren't nearly as many as they were in like the 2021 cycle, if you will. So from that perspective, and I'm curious if other people disagree, like there actually are lots of noobs, and we should just be targeting like new people that weren't even around last time. It may make sense to present things very differently. But from where I sit, I feel like most of our market is like, particularly in these early stages, where it would be so great to onboard like a new cohort of super smart, super deep into crypto, highly enthusiastic people that are looking for this but don't know that it exists. I feel like the way to catch them is to just hit them with stuff that really gets their brain ticking. So it's like, instead of trustlessness, I like using the term Leviathan free. And you could say, well, why are you introducing new terms? It's like, well, the jaded people are sick of what they've already heard a million times and no one's delivered on. So maybe there's value in using language that makes them think there's something new. And there is something new here. I don't know what you think of that, Pinto.
I like the kind of process there. I think the only thing I would maybe add to that is kind of what we were talking about in design a little bit, which is just that it's hard to say without the data. And like, I know that's a silly answer to hear, but more of just like, it seems like to me kind of the message that or I should say the message I was trying to present was more of like, maybe the best first step is actually kind of defining what the audience actually is. And not even like what we define the audience as, but like truly, like if we look at the research, like who owns Bitcoin? Why do they own Bitcoin? Why do they own Ethereum, Solana, etc.? Or why do they own more DeFi based coins, or protocols? But I guess I feel like almost like you're spot on, but like we almost need a step right before that where we kind of can get more information on just like what the actual market is before we say like where we feel like we sit on it, if that makes sense.
Definitely makes sense. I'm curious if there are resources that you're aware of, you know, or like firms that are doing this type of market research, and how we can access that.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's the golden question right there. And I can't say offhand that I do know of a lot of people doing that specific research, but I guess more so that it might be worth looking in first. But something I'll certainly take a look in because I am interested.
Awesome. Look forward to seeing what you come back with. Oh, I see BNC unmuted. GM, sir.
Yeah, GM. Yeah, if I can butt in, I know that stablecoins have kind of like taken center stage, at least for this administration. So if you want to look at some marketing for projects, Plasma FDN has been making quite a bit of noise. And I have a feeling that they would be marketing toward, I guess, the same audience from like a lower level. So it might be worth looking at kind of like how they've positioned themselves and how they interact with their specific community to see maybe what works, what doesn't, and what intrigues people to looking in like that type of space.
What do you mean by lower level?
Essentially not necessarily like throwing a lot of resources at a user they're trying to onboard immediately, but just how they ease them into the ecosystem. Because from my understanding, Plasma is like decently complicated, but I know essentially what they do, and that's just by dissemination of information through different communities. So it's felt natural kind of just learning about it.
Meaning they have like ambassadors going out and talking about it?
Yeah, there are just people talking about it on Twitter, just about like what they do, very like briefly. So might be worth thinking about.
Cheers. Would you maybe drop that? It's Plasma FDN, you said?
Yeah.
That would be great if you could just drop that in the town hall chat, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you very much, sir. It's great to hear from you.
Nice, Chief.
What were you going to say, Austin?
Nothing other than that I found it on Twitter and dropped it in the chat.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I do think, even if we are interested in presenting that we are rigorous, I do think the current landing page is a little bit too mysterious, where it almost obscures the rather it doesn't give you any text at all. It's just a sort of morphing set of images, which I think is really powerful. But I feel like us even doing this community call is a representation that we are trying to make the information available. And so this is less of a comment on what we should be saying, but more of a comment on how we present it, which is that I think in general, we should try not to be mysterious.
When we talk about the landing page, are we talking about the visual when you come to the website for the first time, or are we talking about the overview page?
The first time. Although I guess we could be talking about both because you step through both of them.
Yeah, I mean, for
what
me,
sorry, I was just going to say briefly, for what it's worth, I kind of forget that visual, GIF even is our landing page, given that I haven't seen it since November. And it's not the place that, I get directed to when I use the site, given that I assume it, tracks that I've already visited the site before.
I'm curious, what was the inspiration behind that, the like initial landing page there, with the kind of like passing through the images and then going from Bitcoin to Pinto? Like, what was the I guess like the concept behind that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. We were really trying to tell a story between the feedback cycle between currency and technology and nature. And this idea that, there are these currencies that have different properties over the course of history. And, that is able to fund the development of this new technology. And if you look in the background, there is a network where over time, each new currency that is presented, the network actually becomes more dense in the center until you reach Bitcoin, at which point the network sort of decentralizes. And the idea of presenting the Pinto next to the Bitcoin as opposed to replacing the Bitcoin was this concept where we see ourselves being a complement to Bitcoin as a currency and not replacing it. And so that was sort of the story. I understand that, it may not be very explicit. A lot of it is subconscious, if you will. But that was the inspiration for the animated images.
And that's, first of all, super fascinating. Has there been any feedback to you guys about that homepage other than in these town hall discussions?
I would say very little at this point. I think people who have seen it generally seem to have, at least people who are using the protocol. Back in November, people expressed a lot of interest and felt that, the images were powerful in a way that, they haven't seen. It's sort of different from any other website that they had experienced, but I haven't heard anything since November.
I
Yeah,
find
that's
most
interesting.
people
I was
click through
just-
it. I don't find most people have the patience to watch it, and it doesn't catch them enough to like, it doesn't tell a story enough that is like so understandable to them that they're like, oh, I really want to see how this story ends,
If
Just
anyone has a
images.
landing page they like particularly, sorry to cut you off.
Oh, no problem. I was just gonna say that. Yeah, I mean, even for me, like I feel like just like the references of just images always leave a lot to interpretation, and that could be both good or bad. And as we're discussing, I should say.
What was your question, Brendan? Sorry.
I'm curious if anyone has a landing page they really like that they care to share.
I feel like that's always a tough one too, because it's like there are so many different ways to tackle this problem, which is like ultimately getting back to it. It's like, how are we able to, I guess, capture maybe not even the right group, but a like person's interest on this first page. And so I feel like there are so many good ways to do that, but it would be cool to see some examples. So be interesting to see what people have.
I mean, historically, I've always loved the Apple homepage. I feel like you just type in apple.com and they always hit you with like the latest whatever's going on. And then you kind of scroll and it's like super clear, but very simple. They're not trying to do anything other than like hook you initially, if that makes sense. It's like a beautiful image, like very short, succinct text. It loads really quickly. I'm just juxtaposing it with like this visual that you sort of have to watch and then try to make a story out of. So I've always found that to be pretty compelling. And I'm on it now, and the way
counterpoint on that.
Oh, please.
I've actually historically not liked the Apple homepage that much because it feels like it's a linear progression. Like they want me to see the story in the order that they're telling it. If I scroll, it's not like the way that I scroll, I can't like really move up and down the page. It'll try to animate things, flip things. When you're scrolling, it'll like try to set your scroll window to a specific point. If I find something that I'm interested in, sometimes I feel like I have to mess with the scroll to go up or down to figure out what it is. As sort of a counter to the Apple one, I quite like the landing page on Ethereum because it's just, I think it's well laid out and you can scroll freely on it, and it gives you a bunch of sort of calls to action depending on what you are interested in to kind of learn more.
You're talking about ethereum.org?
Yes.
Interesting. I would say I hate the scroll, the scroll messing, them messing with the
I
scroll
call
for
it
sure.
scroll stealing. Yeah, I don't know what it's actually called. Or scroll
Yeah.
hijacking.
That's always
I
been
like
a
that
huge
name.
pain in my butt. But I guess I'm just talking about more like the static version, if you will. Like I'm on Apple right now and they're not doing any scroll stealing. And I find the site to be quite digestible. And it's like they're just highlighting it. Got two new iPhones, new Apple Watch Ultra, new MacBook Air, new iPad Air, AirPod Pro 2. And each one, they just have a little tagline, which some of them catch me, some of them don't catch me. In fact,
I would
I'm
argue
looking
this
at the
is
tag.
very similar to Ethereum.org's landing page, the static version of Apple that we're looking at right now. Kind of tiled, small little images with a tagline and a button to learn more about that thing.
But I think that, I guess the slight difference between the two is that you have on Ethereum, you kind of, like when you first log or first get there, you have a few calls to action, like right before or below where you scroll, but it's almost not clear where your eye should be going first. Whereas with Apple, I guess to Ben's point, and Ben, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's almost like Apple like directs you, holds your hand to the like what you should be looking at with each scroll. Whereas like Ethereum kind of creates more of like a free do what you want kind of experience. I don't know. That could just be me reading into it, but I'm curious what you guys think.
No, I feel very similarly. Like when I'm on the Apple page, it's so clear to me what my train of thought is supposed to look like. Whereas on Ethereum, am I supposed to pick a wallet? Is that really what they want me to do? Welcome to Ethereum. Pick a wallet. Okay. I think they lose me immediately.
And I think
part
this
of
also
that might have to do with the static background page that takes up half of the screen, right? They want to give you like a pretty image to associate with Ethereum before they start telling you about the use cases and why you should care. Whereas Apple's just like, hey, look, it's a phone, buy it.
And respectfully, what the fuck is this image? What is going on here?
the
You got people
Ethereum
playing
one.
cards. Yeah, what is going on here? This
It's
is
just
total.
associating
world.
happiness in a perfect world with Ethereum.
Where you're hanging
That's
out with
kind of
cats
frightening.
in Ethereum, and people are playing with magic circles. It's the perfect world for new Ethereum.
I don't know. Does anyone find this particularly compelling?
I find it
The
nice to look
Ethereum
at.
page.
It's not
This
compelling,
image.
but it is like it's got nice pastel-y kind of colors.
Yeah, I was gonna say I like the colors too. Kind of what I'm getting though from like these two examples is like it needs to feel like a portal into a world. It needs to feel like you're entering a place, and in that place, you're free to explore the space. And there's a lot of different directions you can go in depending on what interests you. But right now on the Pinto landing, you just land. There's a visual, but there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to explore. You're kind of locked into this image, and then the image ends, and there's nothing else to do.
And I actually think that this whole conversation actually highlights something really interesting, which is that you can have two similar people, but like very different perceptions. And maybe Ben and Sage of the Silos, maybe one of them likes Apple, maybe one of them prefers Ethereum. But I think this kind of highlights a lot of what I was trying to talk about in some of the channels, which is like the importance, the boring corporate importance of kind of knowing who you're kind of going for, right? At the end of the day, it's like trying to first define like who are we going after, because then we can kind of start to craft like a landing page that more associates with exactly like who these people are, as opposed to more about going kind of on the like back and forth, because we all have valid opinions. And I think that it's like we can all go back and forth like a bunch of times on just like what we feel is right, and neither person's wrong. And I think that's part of the fun. But I think it also highlights that like the importance of kind of narrowing it down to first about being like, okay, like who do we want to go after? And then how do we then tailor that page for that person? And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of what I wanted to get across to you guys. Unfortunately, I actually have to run right now, but this was great. So thank you guys. And I'll listen to the rest of the recording later.
Thanks, Pinto. Really appreciate you taking charge in this discussion based on what you care about. So thank you very much. This is really cool and exactly what the town hall is about.
Thank you guys. Have a good one.
So what he said reminded me a small anecdote. I too sort of forgot what the shifting, landing page was. So I opened it up on a browser, and my wife walked by, and she was immediately like, "Ooh, what's this?" and went to go look at it. And that's great. It proves that it's eye-catching and it makes people interested in it. But I feel like, she would not necessarily be the target. We're looking for people that are more experienced, very serious, kind of deep into the crypto space. She would run into tremendous friction if she ever decided to click the get started button.
That's
would like to
really
add,
interesting data.
I would like to
go
add
ahead.
a quick point here that the page is very good looking, but it has a very different goal compared to something like Ethereum, because the Ethereum page is trying to introduce you to a lot of people, and the Apple page is basically for everyone knows what an emotion is. It's basically like very eye catching, but it basically tells you that hey, here's iPhone, here's the new iPhone, go buy it. And the Ethereum page has this is trying to introduce to a lot of people something that is a brand new concept, and honestly a very complex concept. So it can't be as straightforward as the Apple page, in my opinion.
Thank you, sir. Would encourage you, if you're going to speak more, to just fix your microphone.
I feel like to me this was like indicative. Both of what you guys just said is indicative that it's like, it actually feels like the graphic we have is good and compelling. Like it feels complex. It feels like it's the story we're trying to tell. But perhaps the problem is just we're too locked in just that image. Where it's like on the Ethereum page, you have Ethereum and some image, but you can move on at your own pace. You're free to explore. And perhaps that's the limiting part of the Pinto page right now is that you have this cool story being told, but there's nothing else for you to go. It doesn't feel like you're able to explore. It doesn't feel like you're entering a space. It just feels like you're being shown something that's compelling, but not informative or descriptive. And you don't feel like you're in control of your experience and able to go where your curiosity has been piqued.
Okay, so feel like it is maybe a good time to shift to a question that was dropped in the town hall chat from Pinto the Future, which is, can we get a TLDR on how the convert down penalization works? And see that Frio already responded in text, but given that this just went live, think it might be a good opportunity to also share briefly in this forum about how the thing works. So Frio, I don't know if you're willing to get up here and share some information about the penalty.
Yeah, we'll be happy to. At a high level, maybe we should talk about the impetus for creating this change before we explain how it works.
Please.
Great. So currently, there is a large incentive to hold Pinto LP tokens relative to Pinto, just because, you know, given the previous data we required, Pinto has been below its value target more than up. So just from a holding perspective, is the opportunity to convert downwards is much rarer than converting up. And thus, whenever the opportunity does occur, there's this immediate incentive to convert downwards. This change was an attempt to kind of align the incentive such that the incentive isn't to convert first, or if there is an incentive to convert first, there is some penalty associated with it. So this EI we just implemented adds a penalty for converts above the value target, such that your grown stock is forfeited based on this rolling seasons prior to the value target cross. And how it works at a high level is that based on the previous seasons, if the system has been more or less above its value target, the penalty is low. And if the rolling season before the target cross was that the system has been below its value target, the penalty is high. I put a graphic here that kind of has this logarithmic curve that shows the penalty over time based off the liquidity to supply ratio. The higher the liquidity, the higher the penalty. Given that at higher L2SRs, the system isn't in a rush to gain more liquidity than when it's below, or sorry, when it's lower. And this graph kind of demonstrates that over time, the penalty starts high and then rapidly tries to decrease over the course of 12 seasons. Another thing to note is that this is only a penalty to the grown stock of a deposit. Your base, every deposit gets a base stock upon depositing within the silo, and this penalty doesn't affect that. So, this has the effect of affecting more older depositors than newer depositors, i.e., newer depositors with less grown stock will still be able to convert with minimal penalty and acquire, get that LP if they so want. This is really important for when a cycle occurs and people get newly planted Pintos, they are still able to convert those Pintos. This grown stock incentive, or I guess the convert incentive, is just penalized for those with a lot of grown stock.
Can you maybe just say that there's 3 different lines here? What do these 3 different lines represent?
Yeah. So green line is the penalty when the L2SR is around 10%, very, very low. You can see that at x equals 0. And what this really means is that the system has not seen any action above its value target for a significant amount of time. The penalty starts around, I believe that's like 25%. So this starts with a 25% grown stock penalty, meaning that you will forfeit 25% of your stock and slowly decay over to 0. The purple line is with an L2SR of 20%. So that's a 50% ratio when you initially cross target. And then the blue line is at a 40% L2SR ratio and above. So currently we're around, around 17% L2SR, give or take, maybe a percent or two. So we would have a 34%, maybe 40% penalty ratio to start off upon crossing the value target.
Do people have questions?
So real quick, these 3 lines, are these sort of hard lines in the stand, or would there be sort of infinite lines for every, L2SR that would exist?
Good question.
make
Yeah,
sense?
they're not discrete lines. Like, I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, maybe you're saying below this green line, below 10% L2SR, the curve stays at this line, maybe, and then between 10 to 20%, the curve is at the purple, and then between purple and blue and upwards, we have this purple. But no, the line effectively gets adjusted at the L2SR at the time of sunrise. So
Okay, so these are 3 discrete examples, but there would be, interpolated lines between all of these. Also, are you sharing, or are we both just sort of clicking on it and looking at it together?
yeah, we're just clicking on the graphic. No shit.
But just to be clear, Freeho, the blue line represents 40% L2SR. It represents everything greater than or equal to 40% L2SR. Isn't that right?
Yeah, that's a good shout. So, I guess it's continuous up to 40% L2SR, and then from then onwards, we use that curve for any L2SR above 40.
The blue line.
Correct.
Then why is the purple line at 50%?
The purple, starting at 50% is the penalty, but we're referring to the L2SR at 20%. Maybe I misunderstood your question.
I might have misunderstood it as well. So 40%, anything above 40% is the blue line. It's not like an interpolated curve. It just jumps up to that and stays there for anything at 40 or over.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand by jumping up, but from 0 to 40%, the curve will slowly rise up, I guess is the best term, to this blue curve. And then
Was it
From
just
then
me, or did
onwards,
others also lose Frio there for a sec?
I,
Hey,
I
I'm
didn't.
fine.
Great. I'm just gonna reset. I guess from like 0% to 40% L2SR, you can imagine on this graphic, the curve starts from a flat line on the x-axis or on the y-axis. Apology. No, sorry, x-axis, and slowly, increases in the slope until it hits the blue line. Then, at blue line, we're at a 40% L2SR, and then anything above 40% L2SR, this we will still use this blue line
Okay,
to
so it's a
determine
hard
the
cap.
growth. Yes.
Okay, got it.
Any other questions for Frio on this? Great. All right, so maybe gonna move us along here. Pinto Noir dropped a message in the town hall chat saying, to drop a thought here in the chat, it seems to me that the sweet spot for appealing to new users is building an experience that's somewhat flexible based on a user's experience and understanding. It's hard not to think of two possible paths for new users, one being very simple and guided, and the other more free-form and complex. Obviously easier said than done. Curious if anyone has any thoughts on that. Thank you, Noah, for your message.
My pleasure.
I mean, I think this is very interesting. It's something that I'm starting to explore with some of the work that I've done recently for the field page with the tractor soil order book coming out soon. And ideally, we can get to a place where like all of the different experiences in the website where it makes sense to build a simpler version, we can do that. But I feel like your observation is more pointed towards like when a user lands on the site for the first time rather than the actual experience itself, but maybe not. So if you could clarify that.
Yeah, I guess what goes through my mind, and Ben, you were talking about it earlier, this idea of, to use your term, friction. Admittedly, when I think about Beanstalk and what originally led me to that project, it was exactly what you said. It was the idea that this wasn't some, just kind of number go up scheme, for lack of a better word, that there was some real intellectual depth to it. And, I do think that is valuable. But what keeps going through my mind is that the problem is that level of effort required doesn't differentiate between a user's potential. So if that friction exists and it performs a let's call it a good function of kind of keeping the riffraff out, unfortunately at the same time, if a user is saying, subconsciously they're saying, I've got so much, this amount of effort that I'm willing to expend on learning about whatever this new project is that I'm looking at, the same small amount of effort that might drive away someone that is not an ideal user, someone that's a meme coin collector or whatever, the individual that has a lot of potential could be a really useful member of the community, or in-depth user. If they're not getting some type of immediate benefit or seeing some type of return on the effort that they're expending, they're going to move on as well. And so it seems like there's an opportunity to try to figure out a way to kind of thread the needle for potential new users that have a potential to be in-depth members of the community or users of the protocol, and give them a taste of what depth there is to bring them in, while still making it rigorous enough to where somebody that isn't gonna have that same interest or willingness isn't they're effectively kind of weeded out.
Thank you, Pinto Noir. Really appreciate hearing from you. A familiar voice.
Indeed.
Okay, we're just about coming up here on the top of the hour. I feel like this was quite an interesting discussion and different than anything we've ever really had before in the Pinto community. Curious for people's reflections, maybe if people want to drop them in the town hall chat after we hop here, just about whether they thought this was a good use of time and would like to do more stuff of this format, as opposed, in replacement of like long monologues for me, or maybe something that we do in complement to. Very interested in hearing what people think as we continue to try to build out this community. Recognize that our numbers dipped a little bit here at the end, but that could just be a function of the time. It's getting pretty late. So does anyone have any final thoughts or final word they want to add before we wrap up here? Going once, going twice. All right, cheers. Very grateful for everyone coming and sharing their perspective and engaging in such a positive discourse. Really feels like we're on the right track here. So thank you everyone for your time, and maybe see you tomorrow in the dev call. Take care.